All right, so here's a little response video to this guy. I'll put his picture in there maybe. He has some good videos, and he is a very, has a lot of Bible content and a lot of times often countercultural. Except in this instance, he's going along with, I think, the pervasive culture of allowing women to be pastors. And he starts it off as like, this is, people make this the 11th commandment. I don't think it's the 11th commandment, but that's like, it's not the most important thing. I'm just trying to interpret the Bible. It's not just from tradition. I do think this is what the Bible teaches, and I think so that's what I'm just gonna address his points that he tries to argue here. He tries to equate pastors with deacons. So he gives an example of Phoebe. He's like, Paul wouldn't contradict himself, and so he says Phoebe's a deacon. Okay, so there is in Romans 16, it talks about Phoebe being a servant or a deacon, depends how you translate that. Take it, is she a deacon? Okay, take that. But that doesn't mean she's a pastor. So pastor and deacon are not synonymous, which is a weird piece of evidence that he tries to use. I don't really understand. There are synonyms for pastor, like overseer and bishop, but not deacon. And then he tries to use women as when Paul talks about there's two co-workers in the faith, and he calls them co-workers, and then two women. But a co-worker for the gospel in the ministry doesn't mean that they're pastors. It means that they could be financially supporting him, it could be helping him, it could be teaching, it could be doing a number of things, but doesn't mean teaching and authority of men. So, we should talk about that. That's kind of like the main verse he does mention at the beginning. And this is kind of the main contention, but we can go further than that. But 1 Timothy 2:12 says, so Paul says, I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. Instead, she is to remain quiet. So the key thing is there, I do not allow a woman to teach or have authority over a man. And what does that mean? And he's like, well, it doesn't mean that a woman can't teach and have authority over a man today. That was just in the culture of Paul's time, because there were people, false teachers, women were uneducated and they couldn't teach, and there's this cultural background that you need to know to help you interpret what this Bible verse says. First of all, the whole background of first women being uneducated is not a assured background. That's debatable. The second thing about being false teachers in the background, that's debatable as well. And I'll put the book that I read about this. It's called Women in the Church, and I'll put a link in the description. And this is what the book, I'll put a picture of it or whatever. But he has a whole chapter on this. And then there's a YouTube video that the guy compiled over, I don't know how many months or years or whatever, or how he recorded this, but it's like 12 hours. He put it all in one YouTube video, a 12-hour video by a guy named Mike Winger. And he goes to the primary sources and looks at this background, supposedly, that would totally change the meaning, or like say, okay, well, it's not for our time, it's just for that time. But just on the logical argument is, okay, so there was a background of women that were false teachers, and therefore Paul says women can't teach, which is a weird stance, because you're like, well, why not just say false teachers can't teach, or false teachers can't be pastors, right? Or the women weren't educated, so why not say, well, let's educate before? But he just makes this blanket statement like, I don't allow women to teach. So that doesn't really make like that. There's a barrier there, even with it, even if you accept all the background, which I don't think is there. Furthermore, the context of 1 Timothy 2:12, rooted in God's creation order. It's not rooted in this cultural context. He says in the very next verse, 1 Timothy 2:13, for. So like this guy talked about reading the verses in context. Please read it in context. And verse 13 says, why am I telling you that women should not teach in authority over man, which is what the pastor's role is, as an overseer, as an elder? That's what they do. It says, why? 1 Timothy 2:13, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. So it's not like because there's false teachers in Ephesus. No, he's like, this is a created order, and men and women have different roles. They're equal. They're both valuable, but they have different roles. And so he's right on a lot of things. Women can teach, they can share the gospel, they can serve in the church. But all I'm saying is 1 Timothy 2:12 seems to me, and for the majority of the world and majority of history of interpretation, has held that this means that they can't teach in authority over man, which is the main responsibility of a pastor. So they can share the gospel, they can be evangelists, they can even be a deacon. And there's debate on that's another video, that's another debate. But that's historically been, you can have women deacons, but they were like, well, no, this passage and others point to not having women pastors. So anything else he mentions, he talks about the woman at the well, like Jesus, and she was the first evangelist. Great, yeah, she's the first evangelist, not a pastor. Priscilla teaching Apollos. Okay, a woman teaching a man. Again, not in the office of pastor. So it's not supporting the argument. He appears to women at the resurrection, and so the women go and tell people about the resurrection first. Great. Again, not an issue. This is not teaching in authority over man as it would be in the context of a church gathering, as a pastor would do. Now, last thing I'll say on this, again, it's not the biggest of deals. This guy gets a lot of views, and he's very good communicator, and he has some punchy statements. But at the end of the day, the evidence just doesn't match up, and it's not based. I'm not basing this on my culture, or I'm trying to understand the Bible seriously and how to interpret 1 Timothy 2:12 in the context. Last thing, if you're not convinced of this interpretation, Godspeed to you. I think you're still a Christian. I think we can love each other, and we are united around Jesus. Many women pastors are very godly, and they're doing the best they can. As I'm a pastor and trying to do the best I can, I'm not perfect, and God still uses me. And so God can still use anyone, however imperfect they are. You may have been saved under a woman pastor. She may be discipling you, and that's great that God is using that, but it still doesn't make it right. Like, the ends don't justify the means, right? Just because there's fruit in the ministry, there's fruit in a lot of ministries that are totally wrong in a lot of ways, but God can still use that. God can use the worst of us in things. And so the evidence of a woman pastor doing good things does not, again, it goes back down to interpreting the Bible and applying it to today. And I just think from the context, it roots it in creation. It makes sense. It has been interpreted this throughout time. And it just so happens that in our current cultural context, where we want to eliminate gender roles, this has got into the church. So that's something to consider, at least. But again, not the 11th commandment, not the most important thing. So there you go.